is a little bit of a different angle than you usually see me from. Thought I would try something a little bit different, maybe a little bit more casual than sitting at the desk. I've joined 2 different readathons for the month of November, the first being the Skoden Read-a-thon, which features Indigenous authors, as well as Nonfiction November. I have made TBR videos for both of those readathons. We'll link both of them in the cards, which I think are on the side of the screen. Fingers crossed. But I also wanted to try making some reading vlogs for each of the readathons that I'm doing this month. Last night before bed I started reading We Are What We Eat, a Slow Food Manifesto by Alice Waters. I'm about 50 or so pages in and I'm having some thoughts. So Alice Waters herself is a longtime chef, longtime food activist, has been working with these topics and these philosophies of living a slow food lifestyle for many years. Already there are definitely topics that she has touched on that I very much agree with, am also very interested in. The idea of modern society having this really strong disconnect from food and where it comes from, the effort and labor and love that go into one growing produce and then making food and meals out of it. What that does to a society as a whole, how that reflects a lot of our changing modern ideals, and also how that sets us up for nutritional deficiency as well. Personally, I'm someone that is very invested in learning how to grow the majority of my own food, that was lucky and privileged enough to grow up in a household that very much majority of the meals that we had were all home cooked. I learned from a young age how to cook. And on top of that, it is something that I still really enjoy. There are definitely ideas and topics that Alice Waters is bringing up in this book that I very much agree with. I think, again, I'm only 50 pages in, but the way that she is going about some of these ideas and how she is talking about a lot of these topics, this is going to sound a little bit harsh, but it feels like a boomer just shaking their fist at the sky being like, why is the world the way it is? Why can't we go back to the good old days? And that's coming from someone that is very much interested and ascribes to a lot of the thought process that is being touched on in this book. Again, I will have to see how the rest of this book plays out. I think so far I am nodding my head to a lot of the things that Alice Waters is bringing up. But it's the way that she is executing it that is making me kind of raise my eyebrows a little bit. I'm also trying to keep in mind that this book is not meant to be an all-encompassing look at this society-wide problem. It's not necessarily meant to go into great scientific detail. In the introduction, she even mentions like this book is not going to be full of footnotes. It is just very much an opinion piece from her. That being said, I think there's definitely part of me that is like, oh, this could have been honed just a little bit more. This could have been made just a little bit sharper and more organized, and a little bit less of a rant. So these are some of the initial thoughts that I've been having about this book within the first 50 pages of it. But I wanted to document that a little bit and take you along for the reading experience of this, as well as the Barbara Kingsolver book that I'm planning on reading next, which is sort of a memoir of the account of the first year that she and her family decided to grow all of their own food or only purchase food that had been grown locally to them. So I think these books will go really well in tandem with each other. I actually just finished filming the second part of my October wrap-up, and I think it is high time that I go outside today, so I will take you with me in my stroll in the garden. Hello again. Apologies for the weird nighttime lighting. It is now daylight savings time. It is a couple days later. I have continued reading the Alice Waters book, and I have continued to have some thoughts that I wanted to share. I wouldn't say that I'm disappointed in this book, more so just frustrated. I think I was mentioning before that there are a great number of things that Alice Waters touches on in this book that in theory I agree with, that when I look at the big picture, I think Alice Waters and I are aligned on a lot of her viewpoints. However, it's the way that she goes about them, and in some cases what feels like a very rigid thought process that is just kind of irritating. I would say the biggest irritation for me in reading this book is her use of a term which she calls fast food culture. The shift in American and in Western society to this hyper-consumerism that in a lot of ways does not allow for time and thought and mindfulness when it comes to the growing production of food, to the transportation of food, to eventually the making of food. How that has affected society at large on an individual level, but also on an ecological level. How that's had an effect on the biodiversity of certain regions, the biodiversity of things that are grown, with a greater emphasis on things that can be shipped easily, that will taste the same constantly, and how that has led to a disconnect with nature itself, and being in rhythm with the seasons and noticing the changes in the world around us. All of which I'm like, yes, but at the same time, the way that she goes about talking about fast food culture, the majority of the time I'm like, honey, what you're talking about is capitalism. She's sort of, I don't know if it was a thing where her editor was like, no, you can't call it capitalism, we have to soften the blow on this. She's dancing around the subject without putting her finger on it. The first half of the book was a very strong critique on her opinions on modern day society, on where what she calls fast food culture has led society to, how she doesn't like that. But in a lot of cases, she seems to be placing a lot of the blame more so on individuals or the nebulous sort of like individual companies that have come in to market things to people, to push for this mindset of efficiency and time saving when it comes to food and nutrition, which personally I think there are pros and cons to, but Alice Waters seems to think that that is one of the worst things that has happened to society. Back to her using the term fast food culture as opposed to capitalism, it seems like, my guess is that she didn't fully make that connection to what she was trying to articulate to what the larger societal problem is, which is capitalism. And as a result, I think a lot of her analysis and critique lacks a level of depth or a level of class analysis that leads a lot of her arguments to sound very tone deaf. Also, I just think that this book is her having just one long go and rant, and there is like a little bit of organization here and there, but overall it feels very meandering, and also her just sort of like ranting about various things that do kind of all knit together into one topic, but I really don't need to know her opinion on interior design choices that reflect, you know, hyper-consumerism in our society. That's not really what I picked the book up for. Just to give you an example of one of the tirades that she goes off on, or one of the extraneous arguments that she sort of goes off on and shares her opinion of. The reason that I picked up the book was, you know, I wanted to hear her perspective on food and ecology and, you know, the mindset of taking the time to either get back to the magic of being mindful about where your food comes and preparing your own food, or arguments as to why that weren't just her sort of dancing around the subject, or, you know, her just having sort of a boomer shaking her fist at the sky moment. There are a number of, you know, topics that she does touch on in this book that I'm like, hey, I really wish that this had been expanded. I really wish she'd gone into a little bit more detail about, you know, the ecological impact of, you know, industrial farming, as opposed to just being like, it's bad and I don't like it. I would say the book itself lacks the nuance to really incorporate different perspectives. The way that Alice Waters seems to have written it is that she sort of expects everyone to have the same mindset as her of, you know, being deeply invested in food and cooking, which for me, that's something that I am invested in, but, you know, someone else who will pick up this book just out of curiosity, or if you're having a similar discussion with them, if they don't like to cook, if they really, you know, are not super invested in food, How do you sort of make that argument to them of, take more time with your food or be more conscious about where and what you're purchasing? I think there is a much larger discussion to be had around the subject that this book is trying to tackle, and Alice Waters didn't really, or isn't really seeming to tackle it. I mean, I have 50 pages left in the book, but I don't think she's going to fully tackle it in the last 50 pages that I've got to read. So yeah, those are the current thoughts that I've been having about the Alice Waters book. I am planning on finishing that tonight and hopefully starting the Barbara Kingsolver book as well. I don't think my opinion of the Alice Waters book is going to change drastically within the last 50 pages, but if it does, I will let you know. Growing up, gardening was something that my family always did. My dad had a large garden in the backyard where he would plant as many tomato plants as he could fit, along with squash and pepper plants that would lead to having nearly every kitchen surface covered in produce come August. But for me, gardening wasn't something that I fully took to until about a few years ago. During the height of quarantine in 2020, gardening became my escape and my refuge. It calmed my mind and allowed me to focus on something that I could control in a world that felt like it was spinning off its axis. Not only that, getting to experience the innate pleasure of making a meal out of something that I'd grown in my backyard and having it taste like someone had turned the saturation dial up to 100 compared to most produce I'd ever had from the store. In We Are What We Eat, Alice Waters recounts her experience of coming into adulthood in the 1970s, during a time of large social and political upheaval. In that time of uncertainty, she said that feeding people good food felt like it was the only hopeful thing that she could do. Most people from my grandparents' generation had an intuitive sense of agricultural basics. When various fruits and vegetables come into season, which ones keep through the winter, how to preserve the others. More and more, this knowledge is vanishing from our modern culture. Modern U.S. consumers now get to taste less than 1% of the vegetable varieties that were grown here a century ago. Many heirloom seed varieties, ones that have been passed down for generations, have been lost entirely. Humans have eaten some 80,000 plant species in our time on this planet. With modern industrial farming practices, 3/4 of all human food now come from just 8 species, with the field quickly narrowing down to genetically modified corn, soy, and canola. Industrial farming methods, which rely heavily on pesticides and don't include adding organic matter back into the soil, promote soil erosion and loss of soil fertility, and they have devastating effects on the ecology around them. Thankfully, organic growers, farmers markets, and small ex-urban food producers now comprise the fastest growing sector of the U.S. food economy. If you're interested, I'll leave resources in the show notes about how to find your local farmers market or CSA program. Food and the choices we make around it can be a touchy subject for a lot of people. Food systems, in many ways, are at the intersections of many of the problems and inequalities that we as a country and as a world are currently facing. They highlight the fault lines and inequality at large that plague our communities. I want to approach the subject from the perspective of joy and wonder, while also keeping in mind the weight that the subject can carry with it. One of my family's favorite garden memories was the first year that we grew sweet potatoes. We made an afternoon of digging up these buried treasures from the mounds that my dad had carefully tended for several months. My sister and I's excitement when we uncovered sweet potatoes that were bigger than our heads is something that sits warmly in all of our memories. Both of the books that I read this week touched on many of these points and more. One that's banging around in my brain at the moment is that each food item in a typical U.S. meal has traveled an average of 1,500 miles. The vast majority of the food we consume wasn't grown in our own region, but rather wherever it's possible to grow something that time of year, so that we as consumers can have constant access to any and every vegetable and fruit possible. The business of importing foods across great distances is not, by nature, a kindness to farmers who are caught up in the industrial agriculture turbine, but it is good business for oil companies. Stephen Hopp in Animal Vegetable Miracle argues that if every U.S. citizen ate just one meal a week, any meal, composed of locally and organically raised meats and produce, we could reduce our country's oil consumption by 1.1 million barrels of oil every week. I'm still definitely mulling over the majority of things that I learned in the process of reading these books. What are some of the perspective changes I might want to make in my life? How can I shift my mindset to one that's more conscious about where my food is coming from? Food has had shifting levels of significance in my life over the years. Thankfully now, it's something that I can approach with a sense of curiosity and creativity. Food now comes with a level of peace and enjoyment that I haven't always had. So that's where I think I'll try and start this journey from. So I finished the Alice Waters book last night, and as expected, my thoughts did not change much. And I think I have shared most of my thoughts about that book so far. I think I've made my feelings about this book pretty clear so far, but I just wanted to round out this review, this summary, this experience with some of the final thoughts that I'm having. I came to this book with the hopes of learning more about a subject that I have a growing interest in, that being slow food culture, how to adapt to it, how to implement it, what it is, all of the ins and outs, or at least a starting point where I could jump off of, feeling like I had a good basis to start from, or at least having a good place to jump off of, knowing where I would like to continue learning about. The book did have little snippets here and there on the how and the why we should pay attention to our food systems, where our food comes from, why that's important on an individual level as well as a societal and ecological level. Overall, unfortunately, I just felt like this book was very unorganized. Alice Waters tends to meander a lot in her arguments. She seems to change topics every paragraph or two, which I just felt was a little bit jarring and a little bit hard to follow sometimes, and I just wish that this book had had maybe a better editor or just more organization that would help structure it and make it more effective. In the end, I found this book to be rather preachy and browbeating in a way, and this is coming from someone that is already somewhat invested and trying to incorporate slow food culture into my life. So I can't imagine what it would be like as someone who really had no stake or investment in that ideology, and coming to read this, I don't think that they would be convinced. Alice Waters spends most of the very short book lamenting the loss of the somewhat established US food culture that existed in the 50s when she was a child but no longer exists. Hence the boomer shaking their fist at the sky metaphor that I was using earlier. Turning on that light because I'm quickly losing daylight, unfortunately. But in the end, I don't really know who this book was for. If it was someone who didn't really have any cursory knowledge of any of these topics, I feel like would likely be driven off. I don't think you convince people to think about something in a new way or potentially adopt it by being very condescending and very much looking down your nose at other people. The only group that I think I could see this being an enjoyable book for is someone who's within the age range of Alice Waters and also has a similar viewpoint to her already. I would say the most frustrating or disappointing aspect of this book for me has been that it's just not effective. It's unorganized, it's preachy, it doesn't create an argument in a cohesive way. It's very much just an opinionated rant with no rhyme or reason. In the end, I don't see it as being effective in convincing people to adapt a slow food lifestyle or starting to incorporate that kind of thing into their life. I did start reading the Barbara Kingsolver book the other night and am about 75% of the way through so far and am enjoying it quite a bit more than the Alice Waters book. I feel like it is much more effective in what it is trying to do. It is much more personable. There have been several times where I've literally laughed out loud at some of the things, recounting some incidents with her young daughters. I think one of the more noticeable differences between these books is that Barbara Kingsolver is an established writer. She knows how to craft a story, she knows how to work an argument, she knows how to keep you engaged with her writing, which I'm very much appreciating. The read itself is quite a bit longer than the Alice Waters book, but I'm just finding it much more enjoyable. And if you are interested in the Barbara Kingsolver book, I would definitely recommend picking it up. It's not necessarily a stiff recounting of the year that she and her family gave up the industrial food system and grew most of their own food, but nevertheless, it does touch on different anecdotes from their time doing that at different points of the year, as well as touching on the larger scale view of their perspective and definitely painting the picture of the influence of big agriculture on our food systems in this country and around the world as well. There are also parts of each chapter where Barbara Kingsolver's husband will write a small piece that touches on more of the statistics and the legal aspect of some of the things in that chapter, as well as at the end of every chapter, her eldest daughter recounts some of her memories, some of her experiences that relate to the chapter that her mother is writing, as well as incorporating the recipes that they like to use for that time of the year. I think I have around 100 pages left in the Barbara Kingsolver book, but I will be putting it down for the next week. Part of the Skoden Read-a-thon that I'm also doing has a challenge where you read nothing but Indigenous authors for 7 days straight. And so I'm planning on filming and putting up a reading vlog for that readathon as well. So just scheduling wise, I will need to put down the Barbara King Silver book in order to fulfill that challenge. I think I would prefer to do that rather than try and cram the last 100 pages in and rush through it when I'm enjoying it at the moment. I was planning on filming my final thoughts from the garden today, but we have had rainstorms on and off for the entire day, so I was out of luck with that. Even though the Alice Waters book didn't turn out how I had hoped or expected, I'm still glad to have read it. I'm still currently reading and enjoying the Barbara King Silver book. I have about 100 pages left for that one. At the end of the day, I am just happy to be incorporating more nonfiction into my life. It's something that I don't think I realized how much I missed. So this has been a good experience overall, and there is an airplane going overhead, very low. The dangers of filming outside, right? I would love to hear your thoughts on any of the topics brought up in this video by myself or the books that I was reading. Let me know what your experience has been. Have you ever had experience growing something that you later ate? Do you generally shop at farmers markets? Is that an option where you live? Is there an item of food that you have changed your mind about after getting to taste a homegrown version of it? Part of the fun for me personally with gardening is not only getting to enjoy the produce myself, but getting to share it with other people and getting to share how good food can taste. Let me know if you enjoyed this kind of a vlog. I am definitely looking to do more of them in the future. Also, if you enjoyed the garden content, let me know. I am definitely happy to talk about that more in some vlogs. If you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up. That apparently helps. And if you want to see more from me, you can subscribe. I would love to have you here. But that is all from me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.